The classroom was alive with the usual noise of chatter, laughter, and the occasional tapping of pencils against desks. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting bright squares of light onto the floor. Students were settling in for another ordinary day, their backpacks slung carelessly over chairs and jackets draped across the backs of seats. Everyone seemed to know exactly what to expect from the day ahead. Lessons, homework, small arguments over who got the best seat, and a few moments of quiet giggles. Among all the students, there was one girl who didn't quite blend in. She had only one hand, and while some might have noticed her right away, many tried to look away or pretend they hadn't. She didn't carry herself with fear, nor did she demand attention. She simply moved through the classroom with quiet grace, placing her books carefully on her desk, her fingers moving with purpose even though there was only one hand to do the work most of the other students could do with two. Some of the students whispered to one another as she walked past. At first it was subtle, a small giggle, a glance exchanged between friends, but soon, the whispers grew louder, tinged with cruel curiosity. "How does she even write?" one boy asked quietly, but loud enough for the people next to him to hear. Another student snickered, adding, "I don't think she can do anything like we can." The girl didn't respond. She simply opened her notebook and began to arrange her pencils neatly beside it. Her single hand moved quickly and skillfully, sliding a ruler across the page and positioning her notebook at a perfect angle. Watching her, it was clear she had adapted, finding her own way to do things others thought impossible. But most of the students didn't see that. They only saw what they considered different, and to them, anything different was strange, funny, or a reason to make jokes. Even though she didn't respond, she could feel the stares. She could feel the tension, the small judgments that hung in the air like invisible clouds. She had grown used to this to some degree. People stared. People whispered. People laughed. But she had also learned that reaction was often temporary, and her focus had to remain on what she wanted to do. She couldn't let their mockery define her or steal her energy. Her desk was near the window and the light hit her workspace perfectly. She liked that. It made her feel calm and steady. She pulled out her notebook and began to draw, one hand gliding across the page with practiced skill. Her pencil moved confidently, creating shapes and lines that seemed almost alive. She didn't need two hands. Her creativity and determination filled the space that was missing. Yet the students nearby continued their whispers, their eyes darting between her hand and the work she was creating. "Look at her," a boy whispered to his friend. "She's trying so hard, but she can't do it like us." "You don't know that," his friend replied, though even he cast a curious glance at her notebook. "I mean, maybe she's good at something else." The girl's ears caught fragments of their conversation, but her mind remained on the drawing in front of her. She imagined the lines becoming shapes, the shapes becoming a small world where she could control everything. In her drawings, there were no limitations, no stares, no whispers, just her imagination and her skill. Despite her calm, there was a nervous flutter in her chest. Each day she had to walk into a room full of people who didn't always understand her. She had to navigate a world that often measured value in how normal someone seemed to be. And yet, she had learned to use those moments as fuel rather than fear. Every whisper, every giggle, every glance that lingered too long was a reminder that she had to push herself, to show that she could do anything she set her mind to. The teacher entered the classroom, carrying a stack of papers and a warm smile. The students immediately quieted down, some rustling through their notebooks, others pretending to focus while they still exchanged small glances at the girl with one hand. The teacher placed the papers on the desk and began speaking, but the murmurs didn't entirely stop. Even adults sometimes missed the quiet courage it took for a student to face daily challenges. The girl listened carefully, taking notes with her single hand. She had developed a system over time, how to hold her pencil, how to turn pages without making a mess, how to write neatly without smudging the ink. It wasn't easy, and it required patience, but it was part of her rhythm, part of the way she had learned to live in a world designed for others. A group of students nearby continued to exchange whispers, their voices low but full of amusement. "She's going to need a helper for everything," one said, shaking his head. "How does she even do that?" The girl glanced up briefly, catching the tail end of their comment. She didn't say anything, but there was a small spark in her eyes, a quiet determination. She wasn't going to prove them wrong today or maybe even tomorrow. but she knew that their assumptions were just words. Words didn't define her. Her actions, her abilities, and her persistence would. As the class went on, the girl began to notice something else. Some students weren't mocking her. Some were watching, curious, quietly impressed without even realizing it. One or two classmates tilted their heads, observing how she handled her notebook, how her hand moved with such skill, how the lines she drew seemed precise and deliberate. They didn't say anything aloud, but their silence was different from the whispers. They weren't mocking. They were noticing. The bell rang, signaling the end of the period, but the girl didn't immediately pack up her things. She stayed at her desk, finishing a small sketch that had taken shape during the lesson. Her pencil moved almost like magic, her one hand working with incredible dexterity. The other students shuffled out, chatting loudly, some still glancing back at her with curiosity, others laughing at the jokes they had shared moments before. She watched them leave, her heart steady. She knew that each day was a small battle, not against the other students, not against the world, but against the idea that she was somehow less capable. She had learned early on that people's first impressions often miss the bigger truth. Her one hand was not a limitation. It was just part of her story, part of the way she had learned to adapt, to create, to persevere. By the time the classroom emptied, she was left with a quiet sense of accomplishment. The sunlight had shifted, casting longer shadows across the desks, and she felt a calm settle over her. There was a small smile on her face as she looked at her work. No one else had to understand her process, her skill, or her determination. It was enough that she understood it herself. She packed her pencil and notebook carefully, placing them into her bag in a methodical way. Every movement was deliberate, showing the kind of care that came from years of practice. She had learned to adapt, to anticipate the challenges, to find solutions where others might see obstacles. And even though the whispers, the laughs, and the mockery were part of her daily life, they no longer had power over her. As she walked out of the classroom, she passed the group of students who had been whispering earlier. They looked up, perhaps expecting her to react, perhaps expecting her to be hurt. But she simply smiled politely, a small, confident smile that said nothing in words but spoke volumes in meaning. She wasn't seeking their approval, and she wasn't asking for their sympathy. She was simply moving forward step by step, hand in motion, mind sharp, spirit unbroken. Outside the classroom, the air felt fresher, brighter. The sounds of students talking, the distant thud of basketballs on the playground, and the faint hum of the school bus engines waiting in the parking lot all created a sense of normalcy. She blended into it not because she tried to, but because she had learned that normal was relative. And she had her own version of it. The day was just beginning, and the challenges and whispers would continue. But so would her creativity, her determination, and her quiet resilience. Every step she took, every line she drew, every small achievement built a story that was uniquely hers, a story of courage, adaptation, and unspoken strength. And though her classmates might not yet understand it, the world around her was slowly learning that sometimes the most remarkable people are not those who blend in, but those who, despite the odds, refuse to let anything stop them from being extraordinary. The next few days passed quietly in the classroom, but the girl with one hand could feel a subtle shift. The whispers and stares were still there, but now mixed in were glances of curiosity. She noticed students watching her more carefully, not to mock, but to see how she managed things. It was a strange feeling being observed so closely, yet it was different from the usual attention she received. This attention carried a hint of interest and maybe, just maybe, a little respect. One afternoon, the teacher announced that the school would hold a talent showcase in a few weeks. Every student was invited to participate, and the room buzzed with excitement. Some students cheered, dreaming about performing on stage or showing off a special skill. Others groaned, already imagining how stressful it would be. When the girl heard the announcement, her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't planned on participating, not because she didn't want to, but because she always worried about what people would think. She had faced so many moments of doubt and mockery that the thought of stepping into the spotlight felt overwhelming. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of performing, of showing her skill to others, not for approval, but just to see if she could, stirred something inside her. She spent that night imagining what she could do. She thought about her favorite sketches, her precise lines, the way she could control a pencil as if it were an extension of her hand. Could she adapt that talent into something that people could see in a showcase? The thought was exciting, and for the first time it was mixed with a little hope. The next morning she stayed up early gathering her materials. She had decided that she would participate, not caring about the whispers or the doubtful looks that might follow. She had to try, if only to prove to herself that she could. In her mind, this was not about winning a prize or getting applause. It was about challenging herself, taking the step she had never taken before. Her friends noticed something different about her that day. She walked into class with a quiet confidence, her steps deliberate and steady. A few students who had previously mocked her exchanged surprised glances. "Did she just smile?" one whispered, nudging another. "I've never seen her like that before." She didn't respond to their whispers. She only arranged her materials neatly on her desk, as always, and began sketching in preparation for her presentation. But this time the sketch was different. She was drawing a plan, a sequence of movements, notes, or ideas that would form her showcase piece. Every line was thoughtful, every detail carefully considered. She wasn't rushing. She was preparing. Over the next few days, she stayed after school, working quietly in a corner of the art room. The teacher, who had noticed her determination, watched her in silence, giving her the space to practice. The girl experimented with different techniques, adjusting her grip on pencils and brushes, finding ways to create the same effect with just one hand. Sometimes she felt frustrated when a line didn't look right or a movement was awkward, but she never gave up. Each mistake was simply a step closer to mastering her performance. Meanwhile, some of the students who had been mocking her began to notice her persistence. They whispered less openly now, replaced by small, uncertain glances. They saw her dedication, the way she spent hours perfecting something that most people would take for granted. One day, a boy who had laughed at her earlier stopped to watch silently as she adjusted her pencils, testing different angles and grips. He didn't understand fully what she was doing, but he sensed that it was something extraordinary. Even her closest friends noticed the change. They began to offer quiet encouragement, bringing her extra supplies or suggesting ways to make certain techniques easier. Their support wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple, small gestures that mattered deeply. The girl felt the warmth of their presence, a reminder that she wasn't completely alone, even when others were unkind. At home, she practiced just as diligently. She transformed her room into a small studio, clearing space on her desk and arranging her materials so that everything was within reach of her single hand. Late at night, when the house was quiet and her family was asleep, she worked on refining her skills, tracing lines repeatedly until they were smooth, testing movements over and over. She knew that practice was the only way to overcome the challenges she faced, and she embraced it with patience. One afternoon, as she was practicing, her younger sibling came into the room, curious. "Why do you spend so much time on this?" they asked. "It seems hard with only one hand," the girl smiled gently. "It's not easy," she said, "but I can do it. I just have to find my own way." She showed them how she had adapted her techniques, using her fingers in ways that seemed unusual, but worked perfectly for her. Her sibling watched in awe, their eyes wide. "Wow," they whispered. "I didn't know you could do that." The practice sessions became almost meditative for her. She found herself losing track of time, completely absorbed in the movements of her hand, the flow of her pencil, and the creation of something beautiful. Each day she felt a little stronger, a little more confident, and a little more ready to face the challenge of the talent showcase. Back at school, she began to notice subtle changes in the way her classmates reacted. The group that had once mocked her now spoke less openly. Some students who had never paid attention before seemed curious, quietly observing her as she worked. A few even asked questions, hesitant at first about how she managed certain techniques. Each small interaction, each glimpse of genuine curiosity added to her confidence. She realized that skill and dedication could change perceptions even before a performance began. Her teacher, seeing the determination in her eyes, decided to give her a little guidance. "If you want, I can help you with techniques to make your presentation even stronger," the teacher said kindly one afternoon. The girl nodded, grateful. Together they experimented with new ways to display her talent, refining movements, adjusting timing, and practicing until everything flowed smoothly. The teacher never once suggested that she couldn't do something. Instead, the guidance was always about improving what she already did well. As the day of the talent showcase approached, excitement mixed with nervousness. The girl felt butterflies in her stomach, a feeling she wasn't used to. It wasn't fear exactly, it was anticipation, the kind that comes when you know something important is about to happen. She practiced relentlessly, running through her performance over and over until her movements felt second nature. Her classmates, too, were preparing for their performances. Some practiced songs, others rehearsed speeches, and a few practiced tricks or skits. The room was filled with energy, laughter, and sometimes tension. The girl remained focused, keeping her eyes on her goal. She knew that her moment would come, and she wanted to be ready, not to impress anyone else, but to show herself what she was capable of. During lunch breaks, some students began to notice her preparation. One or two approached cautiously, offering small encouragement. "You're really working hard," one said quietly. Another added, "I didn't know you could do so much with just one hand. That's impressive." Their words were awkward, unsure, but they carried meaning. For the first time, the girl felt that some of her classmates were beginning to see her differently, not as someone who was limited, but as someone determined and skilled. By the end of the week, the girl had created a complete plan for her performance. She had practiced every movement, every stroke, every gesture until it felt natural. She had rehearsed in silence in the art room and at home, learning to control her nerves as much as her hand. She had discovered a quiet strength she didn't know she possessed, and each day of practice built her confidence. When the weekend arrived, she didn't rest. She continued practicing at home, refining the small details, testing new techniques, and imagining how the audience would react. In her mind, she visualized the performance in its entirety, the movements, the flow, the moment when the audience would realize the skill and effort behind every line and motion. She felt a sense of excitement that mingled with nervousness, knowing that she was stepping into something bigger than herself. Her family watched quietly, amazed at her dedication. They had always known she was talented, but seeing her push herself, prepare so thoroughly, and take on this challenge with one hand filled them with pride. They offered encouragement, gentle reminders to rest, and small tips for easing fatigue. Their support was steady and unwavering, giving her a quiet foundation to build on. As Sunday evening approached, the girl paused and looked at her prepared materials. Everything was ready: the lines, the sketches, the plan for the showcase. She felt a mix of pride and anticipation, knowing that the next week would test her courage in ways she hadn't yet experienced. But more than anything, she felt a sense of calm. She had done the work. She had prepared. She had adapted, learned, and practiced. And for the first time, she felt that she could face the talent showcase not as someone with a limitation, but as someone ready to show the world what she could do. She had transformed the whispers and doubts into motivation. She had turned the mockery into determination. And in the quiet of her room, she finally smiled with certainty, knowing that no matter what happened next, she had already proven something to herself, something far more important than applause or approval. The day of the talent showcase arrived with a mix of excitement and tension in the air. The school auditorium was buzzing with students, teachers, and a few parents who had come to watch. The stage, lit by bright lights, looked bigger than usual, and the girl with one hand felt her heart beat faster as she stepped inside. Her backpack felt heavier than normal, filled with all the materials she would need for her performance. But despite the nervous flutter in her stomach, she felt ready. She had practiced for weeks, and every step of her preparation had brought her to this moment. As she entered the auditorium, she noticed her classmates chatting, laughing, and rehearsing their own acts. Some were tuning instruments, others were flipping through scripts, and a few were whispering and glancing at her. The whispers she had heard for so long still existed, but this time they were mixed with curiosity. Some students leaned closer to see what she had brought, their expressions shifting from doubt to quiet intrigue. She carried herself calmly, setting her materials on a table at the side of the stage, carefully arranging everything just as she had practiced. The teacher in charge of the showcase approached her with a warm smile. "Are you ready?" the teacher asked. She nodded, her single hand adjusting a small prop she would use in her performance. "Remember, just focus on what you've practiced. You've prepared well." The words were simple, but they carried reassurance. She took a deep breath and nodded again, feeling a little of the tension ease. The first few acts were a mix of singing, dancing, and short skits. The audience clapped politely, sometimes laughing at funny moments, sometimes cheering for talent. She watched from the side of the stage, quietly taking note of the atmosphere. Every clap, every cheer, every expression in the audience reminded her of how people reacted when someone dared to step forward. And she realized that she wasn't performing to please anyone. She was performing to show herself that she could. When her turn approached, she felt a stronger flutter of nerves. Her stomach twisted in a familiar way, but she reminded herself of the weeks of practice. She had imagined this moment over and over, rehearsed every movement in her mind, and tested every technique until it felt natural. Now, all that preparation was about to be put to the test. A student volunteer called her name, and the room quieted slightly. She stepped onto the stage, her heart beating fast, but her steps steady. The bright lights shone down, and for a moment, she felt the weight of every eye in the auditorium. Some faces looked doubtful, some curious, and a few were clearly remembering the whispers and laughter from before. She took a deep breath, centered herself, and began. Her performance started with small, careful movements. She demonstrated her skill with her materials, her single hand moving with precision and confidence. At first, a few students whispered among themselves, exchanging skeptical glances. "How can she do that with one hand?" one muttered quietly. Another added, "It doesn't look possible." But as the performance continued, the whispers began to fade. The lines she drew were clean and deliberate. Every movement showed control, every stroke revealed mastery. The audience started to lean in, drawn by the skill and focus she displayed. Even the students who had mocked her before felt a shift inside themselves, as if something they had assumed to be impossible was suddenly undeniable. She moved with a quiet rhythm, not rushing, not hesitating. Every gesture and motion was intentional, showing not only her talent but also her courage. She had adapted every technique to work with her one hand, finding ways to make her performance fluid and precise. She wasn't trying to hide her difference, she was embracing it, turning it into a strength. Halfway through the performance, the room fell almost completely silent. The energy shifted from curiosity to awe. The students who had doubted her were now watching closely, unable to look away. Even the teachers seemed impressed, their eyes reflecting admiration for the skill and determination on display. The girl felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had worked so hard to prepare for this moment, and now, in the quiet of the auditorium, she could simply be herself and let her ability shine. Her single hand moved deftly across the materials, creating patterns and shapes that were both precise and expressive. Each stroke carried intention. Each movement told a story. The audience could see the effort, the practice, and the creativity she had poured into this performance. There was no rush, no hesitation, only skill, confidence, and the quiet power of someone who refused to let limitations define her. By the end of the performance, the initial skepticism had completely disappeared. The audience was captivated, some leaning forward in their seats, others holding their breath as the final moments unfolded. She completed the last movement, her hand resting on the table as she took a deep, steadying breath. For a moment there was silence, a pause that felt like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to respond. Then, slowly, the clapping began. At first it was tentative, polite, but it quickly grew louder, stronger, and more enthusiastic. Students who had doubted her earlier were clapping, their faces wide with amazement. Teachers were smiling, some nodding in appreciation of her skill. Even the students who had mocked her before couldn't help but join in the applause. The girl felt a surge of pride and relief wash over her. She had done it. She had faced the challenge, and she had succeeded on her own terms. After the applause, settled, she stepped back from the table, her heart still racing but filled with a deep sense of accomplishment. She had turned the whispers and mockery into motivation, and now, standing in front of a captivated audience, she realized that the effort had been worth every moment. She wasn't just performing for them, she was showing herself what she could achieve with determination, practice, and courage. As she left the stage, a few students came forward, hesitant at first but smiling. "That was amazing," one said quietly. Another added, I didn't think it was possible, but you did it. I'm sorry I doubted you." The girl smiled politely, accepting the words with grace. She didn't need to dwell on past mockery. What mattered was the recognition of her effort and skill in this moment. Back in her seat, she watched the remaining acts with a newfound sense of confidence. She no longer felt nervous or out of place. The performance had shifted something inside her, a quiet certainty that she could face challenges and succeed. She noticed the subtle changes in her classmates' expressions as well. There was respect now, a willingness to acknowledge talent and effort even when it came from someone they had underestimated. The talent showcase continued, but for the girl with one hand, the rest of the afternoon passed in a calm, reflective state. She realized that the performance had been more than just a demonstration of skill. It had been a turning point. She had faced judgment, doubt, and the weight of expectations, and she had emerged stronger. Her courage had transformed the perception of her classmates, even if only a little, and she felt the power of showing what was possible when effort and determination guided every step. As the day ended, she packed her materials carefully, her movements deliberate and steady. She walked out of the auditorium with a quiet pride, feeling the warmth of accomplishment in her chest. The sunlight outside seemed brighter, the air fresher, as if the world had acknowledged her effort in its own small way. Her classmates approached her, some hesitantly, others with excitement. They asked questions about how she had done certain techniques, how she had practiced, and how she had remained so calm during the performance. She answered simply and kindly, sharing her process without arrogance, letting her work speak for itself. That evening, as she reflected on the day, she felt a mixture of relief and joy. She had faced a challenge that had once seemed impossible, and she had succeeded. She had turned doubt into admiration, whispers into recognition, and mockery into motivation. And most importantly, she had shown herself that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen, not for her difference, but for her talent, her effort, and her courage. The applause, the smiles, and the curious glances of her classmates had all confirmed what she had known in her heart, that determination and skill could overcome doubt and fear. The day of the talent showcase ended, but its impact would last much longer. She knew that challenges would come again, as they always did, but she had learned something invaluable. She had learned that facing fear, preparing diligently, and believing in herself could turn even the most skeptical audience into one filled with awe. And as she walked home that afternoon carrying her bag with the materials she had used, she felt a quiet sense of victory. The girl with one hand had stunned the class, not because she had sought approval, but because she had embraced her strength, practiced tirelessly, and had the courage to show what she was capable of. That day marked the beginning of a transformation, not just in how her classmates saw her, but in how she saw herself. She realized that obstacles were not roadblocks, but opportunities to grow, to adapt, and to shine in ways others might not expect. And in that realization, she found a sense of power and confidence that would guide her through the challenges yet to come. The days after the talent showcase were different in the classroom. Something had shifted, something subtle but undeniable. The girl with one hand walked into school with her usual calm and quiet confidence, but this time, the atmosphere around her felt lighter. Students who had once whispered behind her back now looked at her with a mix of curiosity and respect. Even those who had laughed at her before approached her differently, hesitating at first but gradually showing signs of admiration. She noticed the change almost immediately. One student who had been particularly rude weeks before offered her a small nod and a shy smile as she passed by. Another who had whispered mocking comments now lingered near her desk, trying to find an excuse to speak to her. The girl didn't hold grudges. She had never let their words control her, and now she could see that their perception had shifted because of what they had witnessed. It was not revenge, not satisfaction. It was simply the quiet recognition of her skill and courage. The teacher, too, seemed proud in a subtle way. During lessons, there were small remarks here and there about determination, focus, and perseverance. The teacher often used the example of the girl's performance without naming her directly at first, speaking about how someone had worked tirelessly to master a skill despite obstacles. The girl listened quietly, feeling a sense of warmth in her chest. She had never sought praise, but she appreciated that her effort had begun to inspire others. Lunchtime was the most revealing. For the first time in weeks, the girl sat at a table without feeling the weight of mockery around her. Some classmates came over asking questions about her performance. "How did you practice that part so well?" one asked. Another added, "I didn't know you could be so fast and precise with just one hand. How did you do it?" She explained calmly, sharing small tips about her techniques, the way she adjusted her hand movements, and how patience had played a role in her success. The students listened, genuinely interested. There was no laughter, no judgment, just curiosity. She realized that her perseverance had done more than showcase her talent. It had started to change how people saw difference, ability, and effort. Students began to whisper less about her physical limitation and more about her skills, her creativity, and the determination that she displayed. Even those who had once doubted her now began to admire her. One day, a student approached her hesitantly, holding a small sketchbook. "Could you maybe show me how you do some of your drawings?" they asked. The girl smiled, nodding. She opened her materials and demonstrated slowly, explaining her techniques in ways that were easy to follow. Watching their excitement, she felt a quiet satisfaction. It was not about proving herself to them. It was about sharing what she had learned, helping someone else grow in the process. The girl began to notice other subtle changes too. During class activities, students were more willing to cooperate with her. When group projects were assigned, no one questioned her abilities or hesitated to include her. She was treated as an equal, someone whose skill and determination mattered. The girl felt a sense of relief and quiet happiness. She had never asked for this recognition, but she appreciated that her hard work had created understanding. Teachers also noticed the change. One day after class, the teacher pulled her aside. "You've inspired many of your classmates," the teacher said softly. "It's amazing how you didn't just overcome your challenge, but also made others rethink what they believed was possible." The girl blushed slightly, feeling shy but proud. She had never thought of herself as an inspiration. She had only wanted to challenge herself, to test her abilities. Now she realized that her effort had touched others in ways she hadn't imagined. At home, her family noticed the difference too. Conversations shifted from worry and concern to admiration and encouragement. Her younger sibling often asked her to demonstrate her techniques, eager to learn from her methods. Her parents watched quietly, proud of her courage, her patience, and the way she had faced challenges head-on. Their support was steady, unspoken most of the time, but it gave her a sense of security that made her even more confident in her abilities. One afternoon, during art class, a group of students approached her with a surprising idea. They wanted her to lead a small workshop to show them how to draw using techniques she had mastered with one hand. At first, she felt nervous. She had never thought of teaching her skills to others, but then she remembered how she had learned by observing, practicing, and persevering. If she could help others understand that effort and adaptation could overcome challenges, it might be worth trying. The workshop was held the following week. The girl set up her materials and explained her techniques step by step, showing how she adapted movements to create the desired effects. She spoke calmly, patiently, and with encouragement, making sure each student understood the process. The other students listened attentively, asking questions and practicing along with her. She felt a sense of pride, not just for her own skill, but for helping others gain confidence in theirs. Her classmates' reactions were inspiring. Some who had struggled with art before were now smiling, producing work they hadn't thought possible. Others who had doubted her abilities were now openly acknowledging her talent. One student whispered, almost to themselves, "I never thought someone could do that with just one hand. It's amazing." The girl heard the comment, smiled, but didn't let it distract her. She knew that her work spoke louder than words ever could. By now, the whispers and mockery that had once surrounded her were gone. Instead, students began to share ideas, seek advice, and even admire her creativity. She realized that respect was earned not by proving superiority, but by showing dedication, patience, and skill. The transformation in the classroom was subtle yet profound. The girl with one hand was no longer defined by her limitation. She was defined by her courage, her talent, and her willingness to persevere. Even outside the classroom, her story began to spread. Other teachers mentioned her effort in meetings, praising her determination and patience. Students from other classes asked questions, curious about how she had achieved such precision and skill. She responded politely, sharing her methods without pride, simply explaining what had worked for her. Each interaction reinforced her confidence, reminding her that effort and determination could break through assumptions and doubt. One afternoon, the principal visited the classroom to speak briefly. "I heard about your performance in the talent showcase," the principal said warmly. "It was inspiring. You've shown that challenges can be overcome with focus and courage. Keep up the great work." The girl smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. Recognition from someone in authority was new to her, but it didn't make her arrogant or boastful. Instead, it reinforced the quiet confidence she had been building for weeks. The girl began to notice changes in herself as well. She felt more confident not just in her skills but in her ability to face challenges. She walked taller, held her head higher, and approached tasks with more focus and determination. The mockery and whispers that had once made her feel small now seemed distant, almost irrelevant. She had proven, first to herself and now to others, that her effort and perseverance mattered more than what anyone else thought. During a group project one day, a student whispered to another, "She's really something. I didn't think anyone could do it like that." The other nodded, still watching in awe as she worked efficiently, using her one hand to complete tasks with skill and precision. The girl overheard this quietly, and instead of feeling proud or boastful, she felt grateful. Grateful that her effort had changed perceptions, and grateful that people were learning that ability wasn't always obvious at first glance. Even the students who had been unkind to her in the past began to act differently. They asked her questions about her techniques, sought her advice on projects, and sometimes even complimented her work. She accepted their words with kindness, never holding grudges, never letting past mockery cloud the present. She had learned that the best way to change minds was not through confrontation, but through consistent effort and excellence. By the end of the week, it was clear that the classroom atmosphere had transformed. Students who had once whispered and laughed now respected her. Teachers admired her dedication. She had become a quiet leader, someone who inspired others not through words but through action. Her courage, her perseverance, and her skill had created an environment where effort and determination were recognized and valued. One afternoon, as the bell rang and students prepared to leave, a student approached her with a small smile. "I just wanted to say, thank you. Watching you, seeing how hard you work, it made me want to try harder too." The girl smiled back, touched. She hadn't done it for recognition or praise, but hearing that her effort had inspired someone else was deeply rewarding. The girl packed her materials and walked home, feeling a quiet pride and satisfaction. The journey that had begun with whispers, doubts, and mockery had led to admiration, respect, and even inspiration. She realized that the true impact of her perseverance was not just on her own skills, but on the way others viewed challenges, effort, and determination. She had transformed the classroom not through words or confrontation, but through consistent action, courage, and talent. And in that transformation, she found a deep sense of fulfillment. She had turned mockery into admiration, doubt into respect, and challenges into opportunities. As she reflected on the week, she felt ready for anything the future might bring. The girl with one hand had stunned her classmates not once, but continuously, showing that determination, patience, and courage could change perceptions, inspire others, and leave a lasting impression that went far beyond the classroom. The days after the talent showcase felt lighter and brighter for the girl with one hand. The classroom, once filled with whispers and sneers, now carried an energy of respect and curiosity. Students approached her with questions about her techniques, compliments about her performance, and sometimes even small confessions about how she had inspired them to try harder in their own work. She accepted these moments with quiet grace, never seeking praise, but feeling a deep sense of fulfillment knowing her perseverance had made a difference. She noticed that the smallest gestures now mattered more than ever. A smile from a former critic, a simple nod from a classmate who had once doubted her, or a whispered good job after a class project. All of these moments reinforced the idea that effort and courage could change perceptions. The girl had spent so long focusing on mastering her skills preparing meticulously for challenges and adapting to her unique situation, that she hadn't realized how her actions were beginning to influence the world around her. One afternoon, the teacher gathered the class together for a short discussion. "I want to talk about someone who has shown us what determination and perseverance can do," the teacher said. Heads turned and some students leaned forward, curiosity in their eyes. The girl felt a small flutter of nerves, but she remained seated, listening quietly. The teacher spoke about the importance of patience, consistent effort, and facing challenges without fear. "Sometimes we see someone who seems different or limited and we underestimate what they can do," the teacher continued. "But when we pay attention to their actions, we see strength, creativity, and courage we might never have imagined." Her classmates listened intently, some glancing at her with recognition, others nodding slowly as the words sank in. The girl realized that what she had achieved was not just about her own success. It was about changing the culture of her classroom, showing that difference was not a weakness, and that effort could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Outside of class, she began to see the effects of her efforts in small but meaningful ways. Students from other classes approached her, curious to learn how she adapted her techniques, asking questions about her work, or simply offering encouragement. She shared her methods patiently, showing them how careful practice, observation, and persistence could allow anyone to achieve something remarkable. Her influence spread quietly but steadily, and she realized that the example she had set could inspire more than just admiration. It could inspire action. Even her closest friends began to show subtle changes. They asked for her advice on projects, sought her input when solving problems, and celebrated small victories together. The girl felt the warmth of connection that comes from shared effort and mutual respect. She was no longer isolated by difference. She was included, valued, and recognized for her abilities. At home, the family noticed a new confidence in her steps, a quiet determination that radiated from within. Her parents watched her with pride, seeing how she had turned challenges into opportunities. Her younger sibling often sought to imitate her techniques, fascinated by how she had mastered her craft. Together they practiced and experimented, and the girl found joy not only in her own progress, but in helping someone else discover new possibilities. One day, during a school art project, a group of students approached her to ask if she could lead a mini workshop to show others how to develop skills despite challenges. She agreed, feeling a little nervous but also excited. She understood that sharing knowledge was not about recognition. It was about helping others find their strength. The workshop was held in a quiet corner of the classroom. She demonstrated her techniques slowly and carefully, guiding each student, offering gentle encouragement, and showing how patience and creativity could turn obstacles into achievements. The students responded with enthusiasm. Some who had struggled before produced work they hadn't thought possible. Others who had doubted her abilities were now openly expressing admiration. One student whispered, "I never imagined someone could do that with one hand. It's incredible." The girl smiled quietly, realizing that her effort had become a lesson in courage and perseverance, not just for herself but for everyone around her. As the weeks went by, the impact of her talent showcase and her quiet leadership continued to grow. Teachers mentioned her example in class discussions about perseverance. Students were inspired to try harder in their own work, knowing that limitations could be overcome with dedication. Even those who had once mocked her now approached her with respect, some even asking for guidance on projects or encouragement in areas where they struggled. She had transformed not just her own experience but the environment around her. The girl also noticed changes in how she viewed herself. She had always been determined, always practiced diligently, but the recognition from her classmates and teachers had given her a new sense of confidence. She realized that her difference was not a limitation, but a part of who she was, a part that had shaped her resilience, creativity, and adaptability. Each challenge she faced had strengthened her, each obstacle had taught her patience, and each act of perseverance had reinforced her belief in herself. One afternoon, a student approached her with a shy smile and a small piece of paper. On it was a drawing inspired by the girl's own techniques. "I tried to do it like you," the student said quietly. "Thank you for showing me how." The girl looked at the drawing and felt a surge of pride and warmth. She hadn't just shared a skill, she had inspired someone to believe in their own potential. Her parents, too, saw the transformation in their daughter. They noticed her confidence in everyday tasks, the way she approached challenges with patience, and the calm determination that radiated from her. They understood that the talent showcase had been more than a performance. It had been a turning point, not only for her, but for everyone who had witnessed it. In the classroom, the shift was even more evident. Students who had been dismissive now asked for advice and guidance. Group projects became collaborative, respectful, and supportive. The girl with one hand had become a quiet leader, not through words or dominance, but through example, skill, and courage. She had shown that determination, practice, and patience could change perceptions and inspire those around her. Her confidence continued to grow as she faced new challenges. Whether it was a difficult project, a complex drawing, or a personal obstacle, she approached each situation with the same calm determination that had carried her through the talent showcase. She understood that success was not about immediate approval, applause, or recognition, but about consistent effort and the courage to face challenges head-on. One day during a school assembly, the principal invited students who had demonstrated perseverance to speak briefly about their experiences. The girl was called forward. She stepped onto the stage, her heart steady but her mind clear. She spoke softly, honestly, about the importance of practice, patience, and believing in oneself. She didn't boast, she didn't seek attention. She simply shared her story. The audience listened, captivated by her courage, her calm presence, and the authenticity of her words. After her talk, students approached her, some with questions, some with words of encouragement, and others simply to say thank you. They wanted to know how she had stayed motivated, how she had overcome self-doubt, and how she had turned her challenges into strengths. She answered with kindness and honesty, sharing her journey in ways that were relatable and inspiring. The girl realized that her journey had come full circle. From being mocked and underestimated, she had become a source of inspiration, not through force or confrontation, but through consistent effort, patience, and courage. She had shown that limitations are not barriers, but opportunities to innovate, adapt, and shine. The impact of her actions reached beyond her classroom, touching the lives of students, teachers, and even her family. Her classmates began to embrace the idea that everyone has unique strengths and challenges. The whispers and laughter that had once filled the room were replaced with questions, curiosity, and admiration. They learned that differences are not weaknesses, and that effort and determination are far more powerful than assumptions or judgments. By the end of the school year, the girl's influence was undeniable. She had inspired her peers to try harder, to practice more diligently, and to treat others with respect and understanding. She had shown that courage, creativity, and determination could transform perceptions and create a positive impact on the people around her. Even outside school, her story began to inspire others. Students in different classes, teachers in other schools, and family friends learned about her perseverance and talent. She received letters and notes from people who wanted to express their admiration and gratitude for the example she had set. She responded with humility, always emphasizing the importance of effort, patience, and believing in oneself. The girl with one hand had achieved something far greater than winning applause or recognition. She had changed the way people saw challenges, ability, and determination. She had turned mockery into admiration, doubt into respect, and fear into courage. Her journey was a lesson in resilience, showing that perseverance, patience, and quiet confidence could overcome any obstacle. As she walked home one sunny afternoon, carrying her materials and reflecting on the journey, she felt a sense of deep fulfillment. She knew there would always be new challenges, new obstacles, and new moments of doubt. But she also knew that she had the strength, determination, and courage to face them. Her one hand, once seen as a limitation by others, had become a symbol of her resilience, creativity, and unshakable spirit. And in that quiet, steady way she had always moved through life, she smiled. She had stunned her classmates, inspired her peers, and transformed her environment. But most importantly, she had proven to herself that limitations do not define us. Our courage, perseverance, and willingness to try do. Her story was no longer just about a girl with one hand. It was about the power of determination, the impact of resilience, and the quiet strength that can turn mockery into admiration.